Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we are going to be reviewing what we know so far about the 2025 to 2026 Warhammer Chapter Approved Mission Deck. Man, is that an original name or what? They couldn't even be bothered to come up with something cool for it. So, despite the name, the actual contents that we, know so far is actually pretty cool. I actually read through these. I like a lot of them. I like a lot of the changes GW made. They essentially made a system that was already pretty good as far as competitive play, even better, and in my opinion, even more well balanced in some areas. Now, I do have some concerns, but I will go over why now in hindsight, now that I've really given it a deep think, why I think those concerns are a little bit less founded, especially for the Eldari. I think actually we're going to be in a pretty good place with this mission pack. We'll see what they do with the nerfs and things like that, but other than that, I think we're going to be in an okay place. So, let's go and dive into one of the first things, and that is going to be the new secondary missions. This is going to be what everybody's going to use and is going to be pretty much what we're going to be sitting with. So let's go ahead and start with the changes. So there are a couple of changes here. Now, recover assets has actually changed. This used to complete at the end of your opponent's turn. Now it completes at the end of your turn. Other than that, it's pretty similar. You score 3 points if 2 of your units have recovered assets. You score 5 points if all 3 have, and they have to be in different parts of the battlefield. Your deployment zone, no man's land, and your enemy deployment zone. So this hasn't changed much, except for the fact that it completes at the end of your turn. This is huge for Aeldari. I can't tell you the amount of times I, wasn't able to use a Wraith Lord or, another kind of durable target because I had to make sure that that unit survived until the next turn. Now you can just do it with anything, right? You could do it with a squad of Rangers out in the middle of the open while screening. And that opens up a lot of potential extra victory points for us. And because we're really good at getting into the enemy backfield, we can even do this with Warp Spiders. Excuse me. So, jumping a unit of Warp Spiders with Flicker Jump into the enemy's deployment zone and then using Recover Assets is now a viable tactic. You could now probably score 5 victory points on this if you draw it in the first turn, which was never the case before, right? Never the case before. If you drew this during first turn, you scored 3 points on it, and you were happy to score 3 points on it, and that's about it. So Recover Assets is now going to be much easier to score. And I think that's going to be for everyone in general, but especially for squishy factions. So this is a huge boon to the squishies. Then we have Area Denial. This is exactly the same as before. Nothing's changed. You basically have to make sure that one of your units is within 3 inches of the center of the battlefield, and there's no enemy units within 3. If you make sure that no enemies are within 6, then you score extra victory points. So 2 for the first and 5 for the second. And basically that's it. Area Denial is exactly the same. It's a hard objective to get in the late game when your opponent's dumping a bunch of OC on the middle objective. It's really easy to score in the early game, especially turn 1. All right, Sabotage. Let's look at Sabotage. Exactly the same. Exactly the same. So it does complete at the end of your opponent's next turn or at the end of the battle. Personally, I don't really like Sabotage. I think it's one of those objectives that's incredibly hard to score max points on. It's usually only going to get you 3 points. And again, you're going to have to use more durable units to score it. This is one that hasn't quite been exactly favorable to squishier factions or, armies that have squishier secondary units, and it continues to be. It's one of those weird stratagems that kind of favors more tough armies, but that's okay. They have to have some in here that favor the tough boys, so I'm not too concerned about that. But yeah, Sabotage is exactly the same. Overwhelming Force. So Overwhelming Force is going to be exactly the same. right? If you look at it, it says each enemy unit that started the turn within range of an objective marker is destroyed, 3 victory points for that. Now, there is a little designer's note on this. It says destroyed leader and bodyguard units count separately for the purposes of scoring this secondary mission, provided that the attached unit started the turn within range of an objective marker. So, I think we pretty much already knew this, right? That if you kill a unit with a character in it, that counted as 2 separate units, right? For overwhelming force. So that's pretty much exactly the same. Let me know in the comments if people were using this differently. I always used it like this. You know, if you had an attached character to a unit and you had it on an objective, overwhelming force gave you both points for it. Gave you, up to 5 victory points basically for it. But let me know in the comments what you guys think. Extend battle lines, exactly the same, right? Which is you control your home objective, you control an objective in no man's land, you get 4 points. Exactly the same. Now, this new one is called a tempting target. So this is really interesting, and this is actually kind of cool. And I'll read it for you guys now. Now, your opponent has to select one objective marker in no man's land to be your tempting target. And at the end of either player's turn, you control that tempting target objective marker. And you get 5 victory points for that. I think this is really interesting because a lot of the times, your opponent's not necessarily going to be able to just hold every single objective in no man's land at all times. And because we are the Aeldari, and because this is at the end of either player's turn, not just the end of your opponent's turn, if it was at the end of your opponent's turn, it'd be really difficult for Eldar to score. But if it's at the end of the player turn, this is pretty easy, right, for Aeldari. Think about it. And as far as I'm reading this, this can be scored in turn 1. If you draw this turn 1 with Aeldari, what unit do we know of that can just reach any no man's land objective no matter where they are? Warp spiders. Warp spiders, ladies and gentlemen. Even swooping hawks can do it, right? So swooping hawks or warp spiders can get there very quickly. Also, our infiltrating units can just get there, so we could just score easy secondary points on this right away. I think this is a very good one for the Aeldari. Very easy to score on. And truthfully, something we can prevent pretty easily in the first turn of the game, because we have a lot of stuff that can screen enemy units out. Now, we're not going to be able to screen every objective out, but we can at least choose one objective that we can screen out fully and deny our opponents from being able to get on it. So that is also a pretty cool secondary objective. I'm really a big fan of a tempting target. Now, of course, again, in the mid game, this is probably going to be one of those harder ones to score, just depending on what the board state is. But the Aeldari have ways of capturing objectives. Now, whether they can hold that objective or not is a point of debate, but they can definitely take objectives away from opponents fairly easily because of our speed and our decent damage dealing capabilities. All right, next we have engage on all fronts. Now, this has had a change. And basically what it means is that slower armies are going to be able to catch up a little bit when it comes to this objective. So they have changed it. Basically, they've changed it so that you still score points on this. If you have a presence in 2 table quarters, you score 1 VP, which is what most people will have. Most people will have an automatic presence throughout the game in 2 table quarters. So that's an automatic victory point for most people. If you have a presence in 3 table quarters, it's only going to be 2 points. So that's down from before. Remember, it was 3 before, I believe. And then you get 4 if you were in, 4 table quadrants. Honestly, I don't really care for this change. I think that it was easy enough to score before. I don't know what armies were struggling with it. Maybe Custodes, maybe the more really super elite armies were really struggling with this somehow. Honestly, I think they're still going to struggle with it. Because even if they're in 2 table quarters, they're only scoring 1 VP. This is a throwaway objective if you're a slow army, right? There is no super elite army that is going to draw this on any given turn and be like, oh my God, this is a great objective, right? Because they're mostly only going to score 1, maybe 2 victory points on this. This is definitely one of those crappier objectives. And the only armies that are really going to have a great chance of scoring that 4 VP are armies like us, armies like the Aeldari. Not always. If you draw this in the late game, it could be problematic, but if you draw it in the earlier stages of the game, you got that 4 VP in the bag. It scores at the end of your turn, of course, like before. So this is an easy one. I don't like the change personally, but I understand why GW did it. It was to give those slower, more ponderous, silly armies a little bit of extra points, but only by 1 point. And if they did manage to get into 3 table quarters, which is still possible for slower armies in the mid game, then now they're scoring less. But I guarantee you they probably won't be able to be in all 4 quadrants at turn 3 if you are playing correctly as the Aeldari player. Okay, let's look at the next one, Stormhawk's objective. Hey guys, guess what? It's exactly the same. It's exactly the same. You score 4 VP if you are able to take an opponent's objective away from them. That's it. 1 or more objectives that were controlled by your opponent at the start of the turn. Cleanse. Now, Cleanse is actually a little bit different. And basically what happened with Cleanse is if you cleanse 1 objective, you score 2 VP. If you score or cleanse 2 objectives, you actually score 5 VP. Now, this can be taken as a fixed objective, which means you score 4 VP if you cleanse 2 or more objective markers, but that's a fixed objective. So with tactical objectives, you can actually potentially score a little more on this, but it's only by 1 point. Now, what I would say, though, is that this is a problematic objective in the later turns of the game because you're going to want your more valuable units to be able to shoot, assault, charge, stuff like that. So it's a little bit harder. In the beginning, though, it's one of those things where it's like Aeldari are great at this, right? We have Rangers, we have Striking Scorpions, we have a bunch of stuff that can cleanse really early in the game. And that's easy. We can easily do cleanse, at least on 2 objectives in the early stages of the game. Turns 1, turns 2. That's easy. But turns 3, turns 4, maybe even into the late game, this is going to be harder because it's an action-based secondary. But I do like the change. I like the fact that they, kind of incentivize you to go for that too, to get that big 5 victory points. So I think that is a decent change. Next one is behind enemy lines. This one, exactly the same as before. I would think this is the one they would change. If you had 2 or more units in your opponent's deployment zone, you get 5 VP, but they didn't change it, so there it is. Behind enemy lines is an easy one to score for the Aeldari typically, so it's not a big deal, but it's only like a 3 victory point kind of swing in secondaries. So it's not like a super good secondary, but it's decent. Then we have Assassination. So of course they have the fixed assassinations. Now, Assassination has changed for fixed, which I don't know why they did this, but they did it. So basically, if a character has a wounds characteristic or 4 or higher, you score the 4 VP. If it's 4 or less, or if it's less than 4, then you only score 3 VP. So this helps a little bit with armies that have a lot of tiny little characters like warlocks. It really helps the Aeldari because we have a lot of 3 wound characters, right? Really helps us. If our opponent's going for a fixed result, they might not be able to max their points. I think this is what GW intended with this, just because fixed objectives are something that usually armies don't take unless they plan around it, and Assassination is not something you can plan around. It's it's basically an objective, a fixed objective of opportunity. If your opponent has a ton of characters, then it's great to go for this. But GW saw that and said, you know what, I don't think factions that, kind of run on having multiple small characters, like multiple little Warlock Skyrunners running around, multiple little Warlocks running around their characters. Or actually, you know what, as a matter of fact, take back what I said. Warlock Skyrunners are not characters. I meant the Foot Warlocks. A lot of little Foot Warlocks running around at 2 wounds. We don't want to punish players for that necessarily too much. So there you go. Right? Or Imperial Guard is another good example. They have a lot of characters that are less than 3 or less than 4 wounds. So those armies are not going to be punished as hard. However, if you're running tactical, you just score 5 VP for it. Simple as that. However, if all enemy characters have already been destroyed, then you just automatically score it, right? So that's a pretty decent objective in certain circumstances, but if you draw it in the early game, it's like one of those objectives that's a complete waste, right? You really want to draw it in the mid game when your opponents are, bringing character units out to fight. We have established locus, which is exactly the same. Exactly the same. Completes at the end of your turn. You have to be within 6 inches of the center of the battlefield or in your opponent's deployment zone. You score 4 for being in your opponent's deployment zone and 2 for being within 6 inches of the center of the battlefield. I don't like established locus in the early game because it's one of those, again, it's one of those objectives that, you got to be really fast to do, and the only units that can maybe do it are warp spiders. So, you know what, though? I will say this. It's good to draw if you have the first turn. Like, if you actually go first, it's a great thing to draw because Eldar can go really fast. You can get in the enemy deployment zone, establish locus. It completes at the end of your turn. And then you can also screen at the same time. So another interesting thing about established locus is if you read what it is, it says at the end of your turn, if that unit is within your opponent's deployment zone. You do not have to be completely within, right? So you don't have to be fully within it. You can just have a model towing that line, one model within your opponent's deployment zone, and you can actually score the objective. So that's another interesting thing about established locus. But, unless you get first turn, it's kind of hard to do. Okay, now we have the last 6 here, and there are some changes here. Bring It Down looks to be exactly the same for fixed. However, for tactical, it's different. So for tactical objectives, you actually score 4 VP now, and that's flat. So you're not going to score infinite if your opponent has a ton of vehicles. So Dark Eldar armies are going to love this, especially Sky Splinter. You don't have to worry about your opponent drawing Bring It Down in the mid game when you've kind of committed all your Venoms. Now it's just your opponent can only score 4 VP max on this for a tactical objective. So that's great. Awesome change, in my honest opinion. Now, it does kind of suck for Eldar players who have like maybe one Wraith Lord in their army or, one monster or something like that they really don't want to give up 4 points for. But at the end of the day, I don't think it's that big of a deal, right? And the reason why is because if your opponent draws this and you have no monsters or vehicles on the battlefield, then they can just discard it and get a new one, which allows them to get possibly better secondaries as well. So, what I would say is Bring It Down. It's 4 VP. Just take it as it is. If you're running a vehicle or something like that in your army that's, kind of less durable, if you're really close and the game's really close, maybe don't overextend that vehicle. Maybe just play it a little bit more safe with it so that, your opponent doesn't draw that. Okay, next we have Cull the Horde. Cull the Horde has changed. It used to be if a unit was at a starting strength of 20 plus or 20, kind of 25 if they had attached units. Now it's completely changed. So basically what it is now is each time an enemy infantry unit with a starting strength of 13 plus, including attached units, is destroyed, you get 5 victory points. And that's the same for both fixed and tactical. And this is really great for us for a number of reasons. First of all, it says including attached units. So if you have a Guardian Defender squad with a support weapon in the back, that is now a Cull the Horde target. If you have a unit of Storm Guardians with Warlocks attached, that is now a Cull the Horde target. So that's really good. That means your opponent is possibly screwed out of a lot of victory points. Meanwhile, there's a lot more units in the game that actually qualify for this. Units of 10 Marines with a couple characters attached is a viable target. Not that you'd be able to necessarily kill the whole thing in one turn, but, if it's in the middle of the battlefield, you absolutely could, right? There's a lot more units in the game now that qualify for Cull the Horde, and it is a big VP dump, right? It's 5 victory points. So that's a great change in my opinion. I think it makes Horde armies not horde armies like the true horde armies, but like horde armies in the fact that they have like a lot of bigger units, not necessarily units of 20 like it was before, makes them a little bit riskier to play because you could always just, if you're playing that fixed game, right? If you're playing Wind Rider Host and you're going for fixed objectives and you're going against something like the new Space Wolf, Wolf Horde, which is probably going to be a thing, right? Then this is an easy fixed objective to just go for because you're gonna max out your victory points by the end of the battle on secondaries very easily. Okay, so no prisoners, pretty much exactly the same. Each time it's a unit's destroyed, you score 2 victory points up to 5 victory points. So same thing there. And of course, if it's fixed, it's each time an enemy bodyguard unit or enemy non-character unit is destroyed that you get those victory points. Honestly, it's not one you want to go for fixed, I think, personally. Each time an enemy bodyguard unit or enemy non-character unit is destroyed, I don't know, it's only 2 victory points apiece. So that means that in a standard game, you'd have to kill like 10 plus units that are not characters and not bodyguard units to get the full points. I mean, it may be okay in some situations, but not in every. And for tactical, it's always going to be great when you draw this on a mid game objective, right? A mid-turn swing or a mid-turn push, because Aeldari love killing things in the middle of the battlefield, and this is a great way to do it. We have secure no man's land. That's exactly the same. If you have one objective marker in no man's land, you score 2 VP. If you could, control 2, you score 5 VP, right? Easy. Marked for death. This is one which I basically hated for most of Pry Nexus. I liked it at first until I started actually using it and playing with it and noticing that your opponent just usually picks 3 units in the backfield. You never kill them because there's no point in killing them, and then you just get no VP for it. So usually what it is your opponent picks the 3 units and then you just discard it, get a new one, right? Well, now it's actually kind of interesting because the first part of the rule is exactly the same. Your opponent chooses 3 units from their army, and you have to kill one of those to get the 5 VP. But you also get to choose yourself a unit in your opponent's army, and if you kill that, you score 2 VP instead of 5. And that's called the gamma target, right? If you don't kill any of the alpha targets, but you kill the gamma target, then you get 2 VP out of it, which is actually kind of cool. It's like in the mid game, if you really don't have the CP to discard and draw a new secondary, you can say to yourself, well, at least I'll score 2 VP on this, and I don't have to just have a, objective sitting there doing nothing. So I do like the change. I think the change is good. Now, is it that good for Aeldari? Personally, I think it's good for everybody, but I think it's the best for armies that we're never going to be able to necessarily kill the units in the backfield anyway. Slower armies, and, that's about it. Like, Death Guard loved this because they could never kill the units in our backfield. They never could, really. If you screened them out well, then they couldn't do it. I don't know about now with all the new detachment rules they have and the affliction ranges, and you can afflict a piece of terrain and you can afflict enemy units every turn automatically and deep strike within 6. I don't really know quite about that, but honestly, I feel like if you screened well enough and if you picked units that were durable enough, then you wouldn't have a problem with that. However, having said that, now they could just kill a gamma target. So they don't even have to risk that. They could just say, hey, that unit of Swooping Hawks on that objective or that unit of Warp Spider screening, I'm going to pick them as my gamma target. If I don't kill any of your alpha targets, then I just at least will still score 2 points on it. So I don't know. I liked Mark for Death. I think it's a good change. Lastly, we have Defend Stronghold. Exactly the same, no changes. Defend Stronghold is one of those easier ones, honestly, but there you go. Defend Stronghold, you get 3 points for. Okay. Moving on to some of the challenger objectives. So this happens when you are losing the game by 6 victory points or more. So let's read through these. This is really interesting because basically what happens is you can get a free stratagem to use, or you can get a mission, which is like a secondary or primary mission. So this can count as primary points, this can count as secondary points. You basically just add the total to your total score, which I think is a little bit OP. And when this actually came out, I was really against the challenger missions. I think the challenger stratagems are cool. I think they're awesome. It's a great way to get back into the game. But the challenger missions are a little bit broken. That's what I thought to myself. Well, as it turns out, that may not be exactly the case, because as we've just read, there's a lot of secondary missions now that give you points for just existing, right? And I think it's going to be a little bit harder for people to get that gap unless they're really dominating heavily in primary objectives. I don't think people are going to dominate in secondary objectives as easily because of all the changes we saw, like marked for death. We can score 2 points on that, right? There's other objectives in that lineup that we were unable to score on before, but now can score a little bit more. Bring it down, for example. Usually we only get 2 points on that. Now we get up to 4 when we kill a single vehicle. That's all we have to do. Doesn't matter about the size, right? For tactical. So I think the secondary game is going to be a little bit less, apart. It's going to be easier to keep a close secondary game with your opponent, even if you're getting worse secondaries now. And I think it's really going to matter about primary. So if you're dominating in primary against your opponent, you're going to have to worry about these. And guess what? Aeldari usually, we don't really care about primary objectives in the early game. So I think, unless it's in the really late game when we're playing catch up, it's not going to matter much. So I think the challenger missions, while they're going to be really powerful against a lot of opponents, they're going to be mostly used by us, the Aeldari players. Like, we're going to be the ones reaping the benefits of these. So I'm fine with it. If we're reaping the benefits of it and it's broken, that's great. It's one of those things where there's a bunch of broken stuff coming out in the game right now. Death Guard, Thousand Suns, Emperor's Children, they're all dominating the tournament scene. It's Chaos Marine, bonanza right now. They're just going bananas. But, if we can get some cool benefits in June and all the nerfs come in and stuff like that, I'm all for it, right? I'm all for this, especially since we're probably going to get nerfed too. Okay, so let's read this challenger objective. So let's read the stratagem first. So it happens in your fight phase. It's obviously 0 CP because all challengers are. You select one unit from your army that has not been selected to fight yet, and you get to make a 6-inch pile-in or consolidation move instead of the normal 3. Again, this is really powerful, but it is situational. This is a situational stratagem, so it's not something that's always going to be useful, but when is this normally going to be more useful? Probably in the early game when you're trying to screen out enemy units, and you're not going to have your opponent winning or losing the game by at least 6 victory points in the early stages like this. So it's not going to matter for screening purposes. A lot of people are like, oh, it's going to make it harder for me to screen out objectives. Usually, typically speaking, you're doing that in the earlier stages of the game anyway. In the later stages, you should have things that are going to absolutely obliterate opponents on objectives in position already. So 6-inch pile-in or consolidation is fantastic, but it is situational. Not every army is going to like it. Or you can choose the challenger mission, which is just simply end of your turn. If one of your units from your army is more than 18 inches away from all enemy units, you score 3 victory points automatically. This is just 3 victory points for most players, right? Most people have something in the backfield to screen. A Storm Guardian unit, a Guardian Defender unit, something back there. If that's the case, at the end of your turn, you score 3 VP. And actually, you could even move a unit away because it is at the end of your turn. It's not immediately. You can move a unit away from enemy units and score that 3 VP. Very easy challenger mission. Self-preservation. I actually really like this. This is very Aeldari, okay? Self-preservation is very Eldari-ish kind of thing, right? And actually, in some cases, because we have some move, shoot, move kind of shenanigans, we can actually make it so that we can still activate and then still be outside of 18 from enemy units. So this is a good one. This is cool. And remember, it counts as either primary or secondary victory points. So this can, kind of make up for lost primary points as well. The next one is Strategic Retreat. For the stratagem, at the start of your shooting phase, one unit from your army that is not in engagement range of one or more enemy units. It can't be used on monsters and vehicles, though. But basically, you remove your unit from the battlefield and place it into Strat Reserve. Another great Aeldari stratagem. I know other armies get access to this too, but I love it with Aeldari because we're already super fast. We already have a lot of things that can, kind of get around the battlefield, and this allows us at the start of our shooting phase to just pull a unit out and put it into Strat Reserve for the next turn, right? Which is kind of cool. I like that. That's 0 CP. Okay, so what is the Challenger mission, though? So basically what the Challenger mission is it happens at the end of your turn. You use this mission, you score this mission. For each of the following areas, one or more units from your army are wholly within that area. It excludes aircraft and battle shock units, though. So you get up to 1 VP if you have a unit in your deployment zone, 6 inches from the center of the battlefield, in no man's land, or in your opponent's deployment zone, and you get 1 VP per unit. So guess what, guys? This is 3 easy VP. As long as you have 3 units in your army, most likely they're going to fall into one of these categories. And this is very easy to score, right? Like, even if you don't have anything in your opponent's deployment zone, you're probably going to have something in your deployment zone, 6 inches from the center of the battlefield, or in no man's land. Again, very easy. You score it at the end of your turn, so you can obviously move your units around to get to where you need to go. And it's another 3 free victory points. The next one is called Pivotal Moment. So it's in your movement phase, and it basically gives one unit in your army advance or charge, or it gives them the ability to shoot and fall back and charge or whatever. So, okay, let me just read it fully, but it's basically advance and charge for most people. Until the end of your turn, your unit is eligible to shoot and declare a charge in a turn in which it advanced or fell back. Now, this is actually really good for Aeldari detachments that don't have fallback and shoot strats. So it's really good for Aspect Host. Aspect Host was missing this. Aspect Host is also an army that tends to lose in the early game. It tends to lose on primary. It tends to lose sometimes even on secondary points in the early stages because it's very aggressive. I guess the secondary points it doesn't lose in, but it definitely loses in primary, right? So having this available to you, just in case your opponent locks up a unit of Dire Avengers in combat or consolidates into you, you could just say, you know what? Nope. I'm using a free stratagem to go ahead and pull them back to safety. And guess what? They can shoot and charge again if they want to. So that's really cool. Or the Challenger mission, which is just destroy one enemy unit this turn. 3 VP. How easy is that to achieve, right? Super easy to achieve. Weirdly enough, though, I think it's probably a little harder to achieve than the other ones, but still pretty easy. All right, then we have Burst of Speed. So Burst of Speed, end of your shooting phase, 1 unit from your army excluding units that made a move this phase. So basically units that already moved in the shooting phase can't move again. But basically your unit can make a normal move of up to D6 and then cannot move again this phase. This is okay. I think, honestly, a lot of our units already, like the units that we want to move again, already have a move again thing, right? Like, for example, if we have a Zerman with Dire Avengers, he already has an ability to move, so we can't use that with him. Dark Eldar can't use Scourges to move twice, right? So that's unfortunate. But, it's also only a D6. It's only a D6 at the end of your shooting phase. It's not going to be that great. I think it's going to be really good for slower armies, like that are running far behind. But again, those slower armies are typically going to be ahead of the Eldarian primary. So, it's one of those things where, yeah, it'd be great for slower armies in the early game. But are they going to be actually able to benefit from it? Probably not, because they're going to be ahead on primary. And you're probably going to be the one benefiting from these Challenger objectives. Challenger mission for this is just models in 2 or more units from your army have made 1 or more attacks against the same enemy unit this turn. and models in that enemy unit lost 1 or more wounds as a result of those attacks. God, that's easy, right? Focused effort is what it's called. So, how many times have you shot 2 or more units at another enemy unit with the Aeldari? Probably every single turn. I know for me, I'm always, in turns 2, 3, 4, and 5, I'm always, trying to focus fire on something to kill it, especially against those tougher factions, which we will be losing primary against, right? So this is another easy, basically free challenger mission to score. Next one is Force a Breach. So it happens in your movement phase. The stratagem, 1 unit from your army that has not been selected to move. And basically what you can do is until the end of the phase, each time your unit makes a normal or advanced move, it can move horizontally through models and terrain features. This one is really, really good. Really good. Because it's just all models. It's not just infantry. So this is insane. However, again, the models that are going to be benefiting from this are not necessarily going to be able to be accessing this stratagem in the stages of the game where this would be useful, right? Like this would be really useful for a Marine player or a Death Guard player or a Custodes player in like turns 1 and 2 against an Aeldari player who's going to be screening you out. It's not necessarily going to be great all the time. And you're going to be ahead most of the game scoring primary objectives. So you're probably not going to be able to get this much benefit from this, right? Or it's at least going to be a close game. You're not going to be, losing primary by 6 or more, typically speaking, unless you're getting destroyed. And if you're getting destroyed, I'm not sure that this helps you. But anyway, that's very powerful even so. The mission for this is 1 of your units from your army that is not within your deployment zone and is wholly within 9 inches of 1 or more battlefield edges. You immediately score 3 VP. Again, super easy to score. I mean, how many times have we already been in a position to do something like containment? By the way, containment is gone. In case you guys haven't seen, containment is no longer an objective. So, kind of sad. I did like containment. I thought it was an easy 6 points, but I guess GW thought it was just too good for most armies to score. So, there we go. It's gone. So, this is kind of like the challenger mission version of containment. You only have to be on one side of the battlefield, though. Pretty easy to score, even so. All right, now we have renewed focus. So renewed focus happens in the shooting or fight phase. 1 unit from your army that has not been selected to shoot or fight, and you basically get to reroll hit rolls of 1 and wound rolls of 1. Pretty good damage dealing stratagem, right? And again, think about how good this would be, guys, on units that don't have inherent rerolls, like Shining Spears. Am I right? Shining Spears really need rerolls. This gives them rerolls. That's pretty good. So I really dig this one. And other units too, that really need some sort of hit or wound rerolls. I think this is honestly really good on the Crimson Hunter. I know it seems wild, but you can target a Crimson Hunter with it. And if it's already an aspect host, you're already rerolling hit rolls of 1. Now you get to reroll wound rolls of 1, which makes it even more reliable against certain targets. Now, the challenger mission for this is that in your shooting phase, you target 1 unit from your army that is more than 15 inches away from all other units from your army. You immediately score 3 VP. Wow. So this is actually a little bit more dependent on when this happens in the game, because there's certain turns that you really don't want to draw this because there's going to be basically no units that are outside of 15 of some other unit in your army. So that could be a little troublesome. But if it happens in the early game or late game, this is an easy 3 VP, right? Early game, why is it? Because you have infiltrate. You have units that are physically 15 inches away at the start that you could just move into position and score it immediately, right? And this could be like turn 2. But typically speaking, you're not going to be losing the game by that much unless you go second. So if you go second and you didn't score any primary in the first turn, this could be used. But that's rare. So I think probably this is a better late game objective than anything else. and it is an action, so it does take the unit's attention. So this is one of those ones where I actually believe it's probably a little bit harder to do than normal. But we are a fast army. In turns 3 and 4, we do have units left that can easily move 15 inches away from enemy units. But it just might not be possible to move 15 inches away from your own units and then also be in a safe position to not get overwatched or not, get messed with or whatever, right? Or maybe you're using too many points for it. So this is one of those objectives, and I'll have to play it myself to really find out, but this is one of those objectives that I think is a little bit harder to score, surprisingly enough. All right, the next one is Great Haste. It happens in your movement phase. One unit from your army that has not been selected to move, and you just add D6 to the move characteristic of models in your unit. Again, this is great. This makes Eldar units that are already fast even faster. And I would think of it like it's basically an advance roll, but it's better than an advance roll because you can advance and you can also do this at the same time. So it's like you're getting double advance, or you're just getting an advance without having to pay the penalties of it. So that's pretty good. And then the challenger mission for this is one or more units from your army that are in your opponent's deployment zone. You score 3 VP. So if you're in your opponent's deployment zone with a unit, you get 3 VP. Again, this is a little bit harder. This is going to be a little bit of a harder one to score 3 VP on. But again, Aeldari, we love this because it's free VP for us, right? Because we're fast. We have warp spiders, we have swooping hawks, we have all the great stuff that can get into our opponent's deployment zone very quickly, especially in the early game. Then we have opportunistic strike. And by the way, guys, I love how there's so many of these. It just adds a ton of flavor to the game, in my opinion. So opportunistic strike, your shooting phase, one unit from your army that is not within engagement range of one or more units. Basically, you select one enemy unit that is not within engagement range of your army and is within 6 inches and visible to your unit. Roll 66 for each 4+. That enemy suffers 1 mortal wound. This is a free grenade. This is a free grenade on a unit, right? Yeah, this is pretty good. Pretty damn good. Okay. Now, it does need to be within 6 inches of and visible to your unit, though. So that is the kind of caveat to this, is that you really need to be close. But there's so many units in our army that can get really close to an opponent. Now, here's the kind of cool thing about this, is that it's great on swooping hawks, because swooping hawks can move really close to the enemy, swooping hawk grenade pack, and then use this ability. Now, swooping hawks cannot use the grenade stratagem, but this is not the grenade stratagem. This is just, well, this is the grenade stratagem, but just, it doesn't say it's grenades, right? So you can use the swooping hawk grenade pack and then throw this on for even more mortal wounds. This is really freaking cool. I love this stratagem right here. Now, the challenger mission for this is one or more enemy models from 2 or more different units were destroyed this turn. So, this is one of those ones that's easy to score, but it's like you might not want to do it because you're spreading your damage out. And spreading your damage out is not that great. It's not that great. But there are certain situations where you just need to score VP and you're just going to need to do it, right? Now, what I will say is this. In most situations, because of the way the game is, you're probably just going to want, if you're behind on primary, you're probably just going to want to score the victory points for this to get ahead, right? A lot of players are going to say, you know what, the stratagems are nice, but I just want to get more points, right? Okay, the next one is Harbored Power. So Harbored Power is your shooting or fight phase, one unit from your army that has not been selected to shoot or fight. Basically what you do is the units, weapons have hazardous, so your own units have hazardous, but you get to choose lethal or sustained hits. This is interesting. I actually think this is kind of cool, but at the same time, it could be really not worth it. It could be really not worth it. Now, it's great on things that don't have natural access to these abilities, but the fact that you have hazardous on top of that means that this is only to be used if you really need to kill something. and it really needs to die to score other VP. Now, the reason why this stratagem might be used more than normal is because the challenger mission for this is actually kind of crappy. So for each objective marker you control at the end of your turn, you get 1 VP, up to 3 VP total. Well, most of the time, if you're losing the game and you're in a position to use that stratagem that we just talked about, Harbored Power, you're probably not going to be controlling all these objectives, right? You're probably going to maybe control your expansion and your home objective, but maybe you're struggling to control that third objective. Well, if you can't get that third objective, you're not going to get the full points for this. So maybe in some cases it would be worth it to just go with Harbored Power, just try to kill an enemy unit, not really worry about the repercussions, right? And just say, okay, I'll give up my 2 victory points here for this really powerful stratagem. But even so, this stratagem is only powerful on certain units, so you really do have to keep this in mind. This is one of those things that's going to be largely dependent on the situation. I can't give advice on it other than to say, unless you have a unit that can really benefit from sustained hits or lethal hits, like, okay, for example, if I was running a huge squad of Dire Avengers with a Zerman, and I was in sustained hits range with them, well, this might be worth it to put lethal hits on them, because then I could just do a ton of damage into enemy harder targets, like Terminators, right? I could kill a lot more Terminators with this strat. However, I'm probably going to lose 2 Dire Avengers as a result, which is fine. I'm okay with that, right? But at the same time, it's like, is that really worth giving up the VP? It just depends on the points on the battlefield, depends what the spread is, and like I said before, a lot of times people are just going to pick the easy challenger mission because it also counts for primary objective points. It gives you some extra primary to work with, which is really important for Aeldari. And that's it, right? Those are all the challenger objectives that I know of. Honestly, my thoughts on this system are they are really cool. I really like it. I think obviously it's more powerful for armies that are not going to score primary early. Like for Aeldari, it's great. And you can even game the system a little bit by making sure that you don't score as many primary as possible. And what that gives you is it gives you the ability to control the flow of the battle, right? And make sure that you have enough resources by the end of the game to close out the game with a 15 victory point swing, which basically means you push all your opponents off the primary objectives in the late game. You have enough resources to kill everything, get your 15 points, and then prevent your opponent from scoring more than 5 points, right? And that's going to be the swing you're looking for. And most of the time, you're going to be using the challenger missions to make sure that the points are close enough to where you can, actually do that and still win the game. Because remember, secret missions, they're gone. There's no more scoring 20 points at the end of the game, right? You have to use these challenger missions to kind of incrementally up your points, throughout the course of the game, throughout the 5 turns, which realistically, you're only going to be able to use these challenger missions on turns 2, 3, 4, and maybe 5. And maybe not even that, right? Maybe just turns 3, 4, and 5, because maybe your opponent doesn't quite get to their primary on turn 2 to be ahead enough to be able to, actually score a lot of points on this, on primary objectives. So yeah, I love the system though. It's really good for Aeldari. Aeldari players should be super excited. I'm super excited for it. I wasn't super excited at first, but I think, honestly, it's going to be easy for Aeldari players to benefit from this, and it's not going to be too hard to really, well, unless the game is really in your favor, in which case, by the way, guys, as an Eldar player, if the game is in your favor on turn 3 and it's continuing to be in your favor, like, these challenger missions are not going to affect the course of the game. Like, they're just not, right? Eldari armies that dominate your opponent in the first turns of the game, and it's obvious at that point that you're going to win, these challenger missions are not going to affect anything. These challenger objectives, or, stratagems, are not going to affect the battle enough in most situations to actually help your opponent win the game, right? At that point, if you're dominating that hard. Like, okay, for example, on turn 2, if you have, or turn 3, if you're at like 30 some VP and your opponent's at like 15, and you have your whole army that's just dominating your opponent. You're in every quadrant. You're, killing all their units and stuff like that. These are not going to affect anything. But what they are going to do is they're going to allow us to come back from close games. So close games, because we're Eldar, we're not going to want to put all of our units on objectives early. That plays right into our hands, right? We're not going to score those points. So let me give you a good example. Turn 2, right? Let's say we go first, and on our turn 2, we score 10 victory points, which is we score our home objective. Let's just say this taken hold, right? And we score our expansion objective. So we get 10 primary victory points. And let's say we get maybe we get 6 secondaries, right? So we're at 26 points on our turn 2. And our opponent goes and they score 2 primary objectives, right? They score the 2 in the middle and they're home. So they're scoring 15, and they score 6 primary or secondary victory points. Well, that actually is not enough to allow us to use these challenger missions. But on turn 3, if the same thing happens again, we will start to be able to use the challenger missions, right? Because now we're behind by more than 6 points. So we can start using these, challenger missions as basically ways of not scoring objectives in the center of the battlefield. And just to kind of give you guys a little bit of a taste of what this gaminess, how we can kind of game the system in our advantage, is that if your opponent scores 15-15, that puts them at 30 by turn 3, right? 15-15 on primary, and we score 10 and 10. We make sure we can score 10 because we're overloading our expansion objective with units that are denial units, Howling Banshees, Fire Dragons. We're making sure our opponents can't get to those places, and we're screening and stuff like that. Well, what's going to happen is that we're going to be down by about 10 points, and we're going to get at least 2 turns worth of challenger missions, which are easily 3 VP apiece. That's going to bring us back into the game by the end of it. And then at the end, when your opponent only scores 5 or 10 points on their, primary, and you score that 15, you're going to end up being ahead of them as long as you're, ahead in secondary points by that time, which you should be, because, by the end of the game, they're just going to have less assets than you. And there's a lot of secondaries that are out there still that require actions and stuff like that. So they're not going to be in the positions they want to be in. And you are going to be able to save more assets in your own army to be able to score later. So I think this is a great system for armies that struggle with primary. I really do. I really think it's a great way of keeping yourself in the game long enough, making sure that you don't waste resources out there, because basically, hey, if my squad of Scorpions can't survive on this objective, that's okay, because when my opponent scores more points than me, when my opponent is 6 points or more ahead of me, I can just pull a challenger mission and get 3 of those points back. So I'm not behind by 6, I'm only behind by 3, right? Which makes a lot of sense. So anyway, yeah, I really love the layout of these and stuff like that. There are some changes to the, basic missions of the game, and stuff like that. We'll go over those in a later video. I want to get pictures of them before I do anything. If anyone from the Discord has pictures of any of the primary missions that have changed in the deck, let me know. I'd love to review them. I'd love to talk about them and, basically, say and, kind of show my thoughts and opinions on the primary decks for for the Aeldari. So anyway, yeah, that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching. Really excited about this. Hope you guys are too. You should be excited as Aeldari players. This is a huge buff for us. So unless they nerf us to the ground in this next balanced data slate, I think we're going to be looking pretty good in the next, in the next mission pack. If you have supported the channel in the past and become a Patreon member or join the channel as a channel member, thank you so much. I just wanted to, again, take the time to thank you so much for your, continued support. If you do want to support the channel, you like what I do and want to continue seeing Aeldari content as it comes out, basically as quickly as I can, then consider becoming a Patreon or YouTube member. It's, the donation levels start really low. You can also join a free trial if you just want access to our Discord to join our community, which is absolutely free to do, by the way. The free trial is free, obviously. You don't have to pay a dime into the Patreon, but you do have to sign up for a free trial to get access to the Discord. So, just to prevent bots and trolls and other, silly malcontents from getting into the Discord. So that's why it's there. But you'll only have to, join the Patreon on a free trial to do it. Of course, I would love it also if, you guys supported. But anyway. Yeah, other than that, I have a channel store page where you can, pick up some discounted Eldar apparel. I have a discount going on for 25% off all shirts and hoodies and t-shirts and cups and all sorts of different Eldar merchandise. Check that out if you want. And then also I have an Amazon affiliate link. Check that out for some discounted Eldar minis on Amazon. All right, guys, that is going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching once again, and I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one, everybody. Peace out.